All right, get ready because today we're doing a deep dive into French verb conjugation.
It's going to be fun. French verbs, they can seem complicated,
Yeah.
but there's a really cool system there.
So let's maybe start with the basics for people who, verbs are action words in a sentence.
Sure.
But what is it about them in French that makes them so unique?
French verbs, they're like the heart of the language. They just add so much nuance into everything.
Okay.
And unlike in English, where we use a lot of helping verbs, in French, it's all packed into those verb endings.
Oh, so it's like one French verb is doing the work of like a verb and all its friends, kind of?
Yeah. It's really cool how that works. And that's where this idea of lexemes comes in.
Okay.
And that's just the verb's most basic form.
Right.
Like parler, to speak. That would be the lexeme.
Okay.
And then from that, you get all these different forms of the verb
Oh,
that all kind of do their own thing in the sentence.
They're like siblings or something, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
That come from the same place, but like do different things.
Exactly.
Okay.
But here's the thing. French has 8 of these finite forms.
8.
8.
Okay, I'm already lost.
8 different ways that a verb can change to match the subject and the mood and the tense.
Okay.
All of that.
Wow. So that's a lot to keep track of.
It is. But there is a system to it.
Okay, good.
So don't worry. These 8, they all fall into 3 categories called moods.
Okay.
So you've got indicative, subjunctive, and imperative.
Oh, right.
And I like to think of mood as like the emotional coloring of the verb.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it for
Yeah.
sure. So if
Yeah.
the indicative is like our everyday mood when we just state facts, what about the subjunctive? That one's always like kind of mysterious.
Oh, yeah.
Like I don't
Very French.
Yeah.
It's all about subjectivity, wishes, doubts,
Okay.
emotions, things that aren't, like matter of fact. And so you'll find it a lot after phrases like, il faut que, it's necessary that, or je souhaite que, I wish that.
Okay. So it's adding that, like je ne sais quoi, like that little extra.
Yeah.
Okay.
That certain je ne sais quoi.
And then we have the imperative, right?
Yes. And that's your commands, your requests, your advice.
Right.
Like, voyez, allez, all of those, like.
I can just hear it in the Parisian
It's
accent.
perfect.
Okay.
So you've got your 8 finite forms, and they all have their purpose.
Okay.
But then you have these other forms, non-finite forms.
What about them? What are they doing?
They're the supporting characters.
Okay.
They're really important.
Okay.
Your finite forms, they're the stars of the show.
Okay.
But these non-finite forms, like infinitives and participles, they add all that extra context.
They're like the stagehands, making sure everything runs smoothly. Yes.
Exactly. And so you've got your infinitives, which are like your base forms, your parlor, and then participles, which come in present and past.
Okay, so that's like the ing ed in English.
Exactly.
Okay.
But here's the difference. In English, the present participles can act like nouns.
Oh, okay.
In French, they can't.
Okay.
So you wouldn't say like swimming is fun. You would have to say nager, the infinitive, is fun.
Interesting. These little subtle things.
Subtle but important.
Yes.
Yes. And then you have le gerundif, which is very French.
Okay.
And it expresses an action that happens at the same time as another action.
It's like the friend that can multitask.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Now, how do we keep all of this straight?
Well, luckily, French verbs are not as chaotic as they might seem.
Okay.
They actually are grouped into 3 conjugations, and each of these has their own patterns.
Okay.
And it's kind of like learning to dance. Once you learn how to do a certain dance, like you've got the basic steps, you can kind of, apply those to other dances.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So you've got your first group, the air verbs. And these are your most common verbs.
Okay.
And then you've got your second group, the air verbs.
Okay.
And then you have the third group.
The third group, the one that everybody's scared of, right?
A little bit. It's your irrave, some irregular air verbs.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of a catch-all.
They're the rule breakers.
They are.
Yeah.
The rebels.
They are. They're the rebels, but they make it fun. But even though they're the rule breakers, there aren't that many of them.
Really?
Yeah, it's only about 370 verbs.
Oh, wow. So they're like that loud, small group that everybody's kind of scared of, but there's not actually that many of them.
That's a great way to put it.
I like that. Okay, so moving on then from the different groups of verbs, how do they show time in French?
So this is where we get into tenses.
And, like in English, you have your past, present, future, all of that.
Right.
But French takes it one step further
Okay.
with something called aspect.
Aspect.
Yes.
Didn't we talk about that already?
We did. It's all about like,
I feel like we talked about aspect.
so if you think about how verbs paint a picture of the action,
Yeah. Yeah.
tense tells us when the action happens.
Right.
Aspect tells us how it happens.
Okay.
So is it complete? Is it ongoing? Things like that.
So it's like tense is setting the scene, and then aspect is how the scene is actually painted, like the style.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, great.
And French has 5 simple tenses to work with.
5. Okay.
You've got your present, your imperfect, your simple past, your future, and your conditional.
Okay, we might have to break some of those down. What about the imperfect? What's the imperfect?
Yes. So I like to think about the imperfect as the storyteller tense. It describes things that were ongoing or habitual. Like back in the day, I used to eat croissants every morning.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I love those like back in the day stories. That's perfect.
Yeah. So it kind of sets that scene.
Okay.
Now your simple past, that's a little more like formal, usually written. It's for actions that were completely finished.
Okay.
So history books, things like that.
So it's more like matter of fact, this is what happened.
Exactly. And then you've got your future,
Yep.
which is just what's going to happen down the road.
Right. Easy enough.
And your conditional, I'm sure you've seen this in your studies. This is the one we often see in those if clauses.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like possibilities. If I had $1 million, that kind of thing.
So 5 simple tenses. Then you said there's compound tenses too, right?
Yes. And this is where it gets a little more complicated.
Okay.
Compound tenses, they use an auxiliary verb, so either
Yeah.
else or avoir, along with the past participle.
Okay. Why 2 though? Why like 2 auxiliary verbs? That seems like double the trouble.
I know it seems that way, but they each have their own like set of rules.
Uh-huh.
Most verbs use avoir,
Okay.
which means to have.
Okay.
But some verbs, especially those that are movement verbs or a change of state or reflexive verbs, use eth,
Okay.
which is to be.
So if I'm using the verb to go because it's movement, I'm going to use eth.
Exactly. You got it.
How do we remember which verbs use eth, though?
So there's a really great mnemonic device for that.
Okay, good, because that's a lot to keep track of.
It is. It's MSS Vandertramp.
What?
Yes.
Mm.
And each letter stands for the first letter of a verb that typically uses eth.
Mrs. Vandertramp. Okay, wow. Okay, so we've got tenses, we've got aspects, we've got moods, we've got these auxiliary verbs. Is there anything else that we need to know?
We're almost there, but there's one last little thing.
Okay.
Past participle agreement.
Past participle agreement. That sounds intimidating.
It can be a little tricky,
Yeah.
but there's a system to it.
Okay, good.
Like, there's a reason there are rules.
So what's the general idea? Like, what am I trying to do with this past participle agreement?
So basically, you're making sure that the past participle agrees with either the subject or the direct object of the sentence.
Okay. So similar to like in English, how we have to make sure our subjects and verbs agree, but this is like next level.
It's a French twist on that. Yeah.
A French twist. I like it. Okay. So how do I know when to make the agreement? Like, what are the rules?
So first, you got to look at your auxiliary verb,
Okay.
être or avoir,
Right.
and then you have to pay attention to where the direct object is.
Okay.
Is it before or after the past participle?
So there's like a lot of little things to keep track of. It's like a little puzzle.
It is. It's like a grammar puzzle.
I like those. Okay.
And the good news is, in spoken French, a lot of times you can't even hear the agreement.
Oh, okay. So it's not as important when you're actually speaking.
It's more of a written thing. It's like those fashion details that, they matter, but like if you miss one, it's not the end of the world.
Right. But it's good to know when you need to be aware of it at least.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on French verb conjugation, what would you say is the most rewarding thing about like mastering this system?
For me, it's like you unlock this door to understanding how the language works.
Okay.
It's so precise and nuanced.
Right.
And every little ending, every agreement, it all means something.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
It's like that language is very intentional. Everything has its place.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I feel like we've covered so much. We talked about the different groups, tenses, moods, these auxiliary verbs, past participle agreement. What a journey this has been.
It has.
I feel like we really unlock the secrets of French verbs.
Yes.
And you know what? I feel like every time we do one of these deep dives, it just makes me want to learn more.
Absolutely. Language is a journey.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's like a never-ending puzzle that I want to keep solving.
Exactly.
So, to everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.